Hey, mamas. Welcome back to Knit Your Stress Away, your podcast all around knitting for beginners, especially for busy moms who are just learning how to knit and trying to fit it into their busy lives. Today, we're talking about frustrations when learning to knit and how to overcome them. And I know there may be lots of them, so we're going to address a few today, and hopefully one of those or multiple ones of these solutions that I have for you are going to speak to you. All right, let's dive into the episode. Welcome to Knit Your Stress Away. Are you a mom who feels overwhelmed, craving a creative outlet, but unsure where to start or how to fit it into your already packed day? I have dedicated this podcast to help you discover practical, guilt-free self-care strategies through the calming practice of knitting. I'll help you break free from the overwhelm, quiet the noise and comparison of social media, empowering you to pick up your knitting needles instead and embrace moments of rest, creativity, and mindfulness. Hi, I'm Nadine, a mom, wife, and passionate knitter. I first learned to knit as a teenager from my grandmother back in Germany, but for some reason, I put my needles down in my 20s. It wasn't until 2020, when everyone was searching for ways to ease the anxiety of the unknown, that I picked knitting back up, and something amazing happened. I found peace and joy in the cozy, calming rhythm of knitting, and now I'm so excited to share my practical tips and habits with you so you can reclaim your time, recharge, and rediscover the things that bring you happiness. It's time to ditch the endless scroll on social media and focus on what truly matters, your well-being. So if you're ready to take control of your stress, ditch overwhelm and social media comparison, rekindle your creativity, and recharge with a hobby you love, this podcast will guide you every step of the way. Take a deep breath, grab your knitting needles, and let's start creating a life with less stress and more joy, one stitch at a time. All right, before we dive into today's episode and address some of the common frustrations when learning to knit, I want to give you a quick reminder that today is the last day to enroll for the live knitting workshop, Knitting Made Simple for Busy Mamas. It happens as I'm recording this. Today is Tuesday. This happens tomorrow, December 4th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And you're invited to join us for the live workshop. You are going to leave the workshop feeling confident that you can actually complete an entire knitting project. We are going to make little headbands, twisted headbands, that you can either keep for yourself or give away as a gift. I just do want to give you a little bit of a heads up. We aren't going to actually complete the project in the workshop because the workshop is only 60 minutes long. It's designed to be quick, but also very effective to teach you how to cast on, how to knit, and how to cast off so that you can, in fact, finish an entire project. But you will have everything that you need in order to complete the project after the workshop. And no worries if for some reason you're thinking, I can't enroll because I don't have time tomorrow at 10 a.m. EST. Not a problem at all. It's going to be recorded and you will get the recording as long as you are registered for the workshop. So you can sign up. Today is the last day. You can sign up at theknittingmamas.com/workshop. All right. And I hope I see a lot of you there. I'm just so very excited about it. All right. Today we are talking about frustrations when you're learning to knit, sometimes even when you're already kind of in the knitting. And if you're like in your beginner stage, but you've been doing it maybe for a little while, but you're coming across either yarn that doesn't want to cooperate or needles that aren't working, or maybe the combination of the two, something is off and it feels this is supposed to be a relaxing hobby and it feels anything but calming. And if that's been you, or if you've come across this, or if you want to just save this podcast for the time when that actually does happen, which it's very likely that it will at some point, this episode is exactly what you need. And I just want to let you know that I completely get it. Like, this episode did not come from, it's always been smooth sailing on this end and I never have any issues. Maybe I need to talk about those struggles more in general, like on Instagram or in the Facebook group, and show you I have plenty of those struggles and it is not a problem. So just to let you know, learning to knit and even continuing your knitting journey as you learn new techniques and things, maybe, looking at more challenging patterns, it can bring some frustration sometimes. And we want to make sure that this knitting experience is usually a relaxing one that you look forward to. So today we are going to talk through some of the most common frustrations that new knitters might face and how to fix them. So by the end of this episode, you will feel much more empowered to tackle those challenges with more confidence and ease. So first things first, let's identify the source of the frustration because there can be multiple ones. So before we dive into the solutions, obviously the first thing we want to talk about is what's the source? Why are we frustrated with our knitting? So I suggest take a step back, pause for a second, take a deep breath, and look at what is actually frustrating you. So is it maybe lack of time to practice? Are you short on time and you're just kind of squeezing it in and it just isn't flowing today? Maybe you're trying a new technique or, trying to get back into a technique and it just isn't clicking. Or you've chosen a pattern that may not be the right one for you right now. So let's think about these things. Number one, are you maybe rushing through your knitting time and you're feeling stressed because you don't have enough time? Is there something there that's kind of stressing you out and it's related to your actual knitting, meaning it won't release the stress, which usually is what we're trying, with the knitting. Like it can really help you through stress that is related to other things in your life. But if the stress is coming from the fact that you're thinking about your knitting in some way, then yes, of course, it's not gonna help resolve it, right? The second cause could be a stitch or a technique that isn't clicking, no matter how many times you've tried and you've done multiple tutorials, or, I know that there's sometimes tutorials where people are just doing the same thing, but they're doing it in a different way. So that you can have three different, people showing you the same thing in three different ways. And it can be very frustrating. Or number three, is your pattern too complicated? You may have accidentally chosen a pattern that might not be fitting with your skill levels at this point, which is completely okay. But I feel like acknowledging that is better than trying to push through and just leaving, or being so frustrated that you may not even want to pick it up again. I always talk about this fine line between, challenging yourself and really trying to push those limits and learn new things, but at the same time not make it too hard to where you're like, oh, this sucks and I just don't have time for it, and then you don't pick up your knitting again. I think that would be just such a shame. So we got to kind of ease into those more complicated patterns as we go. It may even be something more physical, as in the yarn doesn't feel right in your hands or the needles aren't working well. I had this one time. I was making a scarf for my best friend and the yarn, it was 100% wool, which if you've listened to this podcast for a little while, you may know that I am allergic to it, which isn't fun. So I start sneezing and having like breathing issues. And it can be funny with my skin as well. That's more when I wear it, not necessarily when I'm working with it, but I can feel like my breath being kind of impacted when I'm working with just wool. So there was that. And then the other thing was it was really, really super chunky yarn. Like, I mean, super chunky, not the one that I'm recommending for you to use, the, kind of a medium yarn strength, but it was like very thick. And the needles I had to use were huge. So all that together was not making for an amazing experience at all. And I was really happy when I was done with that one. It came out so pretty. And I was really excited about giving it to her and she loved it. But it was not a fun experience to make it because the yarn wasn't very slippery. So it wasn't going through the loops very easily. And it almost felt like I was forcing it. And it was hurting my hands and it was just all the things and that can definitely be a source of frustration. So the great news is, whatever the source of your frustration, it can be fixed. And you don't have to give up on knitting at all. But let's just tweak what's happening and come up with a couple of solutions. So if your problem is feeling like you're rushing through it, that you don't have enough time, any kind of time issue, give yourself a permission to take a break and reset, right? Start small. Maybe don't think you have to sit down for 30 minutes for it to be worth it, but just make 5 to 10-minute increments and say, hey, this is a time for me. This is supposed to be enjoyable, and this is not something that's supposed to stress me out. So go into your knitting break without feeling rushed that you maybe have to get a certain amount done. I feel that often when I read a book, especially when I read a book with other people and they're ahead of me. Then I'm like, oh my God, I gotta read. I gotta go sit down and I do this. And it just becomes this like stressful thing and this rush thing versus what it's supposed to be, which is relaxing, joyful, and something that I really love doing. Instead, I'm pushing so much pressure on myself. So full permission to take a breath and relax and know that even if you're not getting it done in a certain time, or even if you are taking much longer than you thought you would, make sure this is something fun that you actually look forward to. Do not put that pressure on yourself about anything that is related to time or stress, okay? If it has something to do with technique, if it's something that has got you stumped, or you're just not figuring out how to do it, you're definitely not alone. I have so many times, there were so many times when I was like, my gosh, why do I not remember how to do this? So for example, so the decreases and increases that you learn to knit when you knit a sweater from the top down. So a raglan sweater, you started at the top at the collar, and then you knit down, and then you increase in 4 areas. So it'd be the front of your shoulder and the back of your shoulder on either side. So it's 4 little areas where you have to increase, then probably knit 2 or so, and then decrease. And it keeps going like that. Actually, no, you're increasing the entire time. I'm lying. You're not decreasing at all. So you're increasing, but it leans in to the right side, and then the next increase leans to the left side. And it's a similar technique, but they're still different because one leans to the left, one leans to the right. But you're making a new stitch every time. So you're increasing your stitches on your needles. For the longest time, I could not remember which one was the left and which one was the right increase, and it drove me crazy. And it was not fun to continue to having to look back at the video and be like, my gosh, every time I'm coming around the circle here, I have to do this 4 times and I just can't remember. Or, I finally have it down and I'm like, okay, it's flowing, it's going. And then the next time I sat down, I'm like, wait, what? How was that again? So it can really be a little frustrating, but I would say in this case, so if it's something where you're like, wow, I really don't know how to do this, just see if you can find other tutorials on YouTube. I think YouTube is still your best friend when it comes to this, but I would highly recommend you finding multiple ones and just watch them and see which one kind of fits your style the most. So you have to really, like I said earlier, there may be multiple different ways that someone is tackling the same technique, but you have to figure out which one is actually the one for you. And that can take a little bit longer. And my other suggestion is to maybe make yourself a couple of notes so that it's a little bit easier to remember, and you may not have to watch the video again. So if you feel like you do have to watch the video again, of course, bookmarking it is a great idea, and have your phone next to you so you can just really quickly go back to it and watch it again. But I definitely know the frustration, and this may not be the easiest tip to get through because a lot of it is just practice and doing it over and over again. But even as I'm thinking about my left and right increases now, I remember that as they come up in patterns where I'm using them, in fact, I had to use it in my triangle scarf. If you guys remember me knitting that in the summer, the one with the stripes, I had to do that in the middle and also on the sides. And I literally made little notes on my pattern that said, make one left and make one right, which is the term for this. And then I made myself a little note, okay, in one of them I have to go from the front loop, and in the other one I have to go from the back loop. You may not know what that means right now, but just to say that a little note really helped me remember the video, and I didn't have to pull up the video every single time. So, and then of course with practice, the more you do it, the better you remember it. But I would just say really focus on finding the technique that works well for you, that you can really actually see doing when you watch it. And then practice in short bursts without pressure to get it right. And then do that over and over again. And if you're feeling like, oh gosh, too much, seriously, take a step back and just leave it alone for a little bit and then come back to it later. Which, by the way, brings me back to my whole, I want to call it a mantra, I don't know, have multiple knitting projects going at the same time. This is another reason why that works well. Not only could you potentially get bored with one of them and you want to pick up another one, but also you could get frustrated with one and be like, okay, I just need a break from this one right now. Let's pick up this other one. That is very easy, where I know everything and I don't have to look anything up and I can just go. When that becomes boring again, you go back to the one that's challenging and try it again. So you see how that works? It makes a lot of sense, even for a beginner. I think I mentioned that in a couple of episodes ago, that even though it may seem counterproductive for a beginner to have multiple projects going at once, I highly recommend it just for these reasons. So another thing could be that you have chosen a pattern that is just too much, but I'm here to give you full permission to also set that one aside for now. You're not giving up. You're just taking a break, right? Pick something that may just be a little bit more straightforward so that you can build your confidence and you can always come back to the tricky one later. Kind of goes hand in hand with the technique one where you're like, ooh, not sure. This one is frustrating the crap out of me before it's too much. And you're like, okay, great. This 30 minutes of knitting just frustrated me more than my day did before, right? Put it down. It's not a problem. You're not quitting. There's nothing bad about it. You are just learning. And I think that mindset will take you really far. When we tell ourselves that we're not good enough or something is not clicking because we just don't get it, all that negative self-talk, it can really, really put us in a bad place. So much so that we might give up on this. And I just don't think that's the way to go. I think what we really need is give ourselves some grace and have a mindset that helps us learn, where we are able and allowed to make mistakes because we're going to, because we're humans, right? And we just kind of go from there. I think that's such a great thing to embrace. And I always love to kind of pass those kind of mindset shifts onto other people, but also my kids. And I think it's important for them to see that we're willing to learn new things too, as they do every day. And we're willing to say, hey, you know what? If I don't get it the first time, that's completely okay. So, and the last problem we talked about is it could be some sort of yarn or needle issue. If the yarn isn't behaving, the needles are making it hard, your hands are hurting, it's okay to try something different. Maybe, once again, because if you want to finish that project and you really love what it looks like when it's done, like for me with that scarf that I was talking about, I just kind of, took breaks. I was like, okay, I've had enough of this for now. My hand is hurting. It's not feeling great. This is it feels more like work than something fun. Let's put this aside. It's okay. That's why I started early. But if you can change the yarn or the material in general, try to switch it out. Most times I understand that might not be possible. But now at least, okay, this combination of this yarn and this needle may not be great, so I might not do that again, right? You can try the same needle with a different yarn, or vice versa. You can try the same yarn with a different needle and see if maybe that changes it, because a lot of times it's just kind of the texture of the yarn with the material of the needle. And it oftentimes doesn't work. And for me, I can actually pinpoint it exactly. You always hear me talk about my favorite needles, besides the fact that they're circular needles, but this is not the point here. The point is the material of the actual needle of the tip. I always recommend metal needles because they're very smooth and they slide very easily. So for me, it works really well. Of course, there's people who are like, oh, I don't like when it's slippery because I lose my stitches. For me, it works well because of most of the yarn that I work with needs to smoothly glide over the needle. Of course, there's different yarn that kind of just slips very quickly across the needle and it might be counterproductive. So, and I remember for this specific scarf, I couldn't find a needle in the size because it was a really thick needle that I needed. I literally have only bought that needle for that scarf. I don't think I've ever used it again, probably because of that experience. but it was a wooden needle, and it wasn't the kind of quality that I'm used to, but I couldn't find another pair at the time, and I just needed it. So I'm pretty sure that the reason why it was such an interestingly strange experience knitting that was the material of the needle, and it wasn't going well with my yarn. So just a little side note for you to kind of, explore when you're looking at those things. But sometimes you can just push through and say, you know what, I'm just going to finish it. It may not be my most favorite project to make, but it'll be one of my favorite ones to wear, maybe, or give away, like it was for me. But I want to encourage you to come into the Facebook community as well if you're feeling like you might have some of these issues, and we can talk through them together. So we're always here for you to kind of pinpoint your frustrations, to see if there's a solution. You can take pictures, you can make a video, you can post all of those things in that group, and we're here for you to answer those questions. You can find the group at theknittingmamas.com/group. All right, to wrap up this episode, let's recap. So when your knitting starts to feel a little frustrating, more frustrating than relaxing, which is the opposite of what we want, right? Take a step back. Figure out what's really going on, whether it's time, any time stressors, technique, the pattern itself, or even the tools that you're using. And once you've identified the source, you can then adjust. You can come into our group, you can ask your questions there, and you have full permission to try a different project, to use a different technique, to watch a tutorial where somebody is going completely different on the technique, and also to make a small swap. So, for example, using different needles if necessary. I want you to remember that knitting is supposed to be fun and relaxing and not another stressor in your life, because if that is the case, you're not going to pick it up again. And that is not what I want for you. If something's not working, it's okay to tweak it, and we've got you covered here. Also, you've got this, and you are definitely not alone in any of your knitting struggles that you have, because every knitter, no matter how experienced, has been where you are, and in most cases, I'm going to include myself in this, still is. So do not think that I never have knitting frustrations. So I'm definitely right here with you. So I want you to take a deep breath, make your adjustments, and then keep going. The end product that you're working on is so well worth it. And also the stress relief that you are going to experience once you get past that frustration is as well. So hopefully I will see some of you guys in the Knitting Make It Simple workshop tomorrow morning. If not, I hope I see you around in our Facebook group. Until next time, right here on the Knit Your Stress Away podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on today's episode. I hope you're walking away with a bit more inspiration and a few ideas to make your self-care a priority. If today's chat gave you a little boost, I'd love it if you could leave a 5-star review on iTunes. This helps other moms discover the podcast and start finding more calm and creativity in their day as well. And don't forget to join us over in the Knitting Mamas community on Facebook by going to theknittingmamas.com/group. Thanks again, and remember, you deserve time for yourself to recharge and feel your best. Catch you next time on the Knit the Stress Away podcast.